Today's feast of the baptism of the Lord completes the Christmas season. At Christmas, God reveals to us some of the most important truths that we need to know. Two very important beliefs that we must have that can entirely change our life. So the first thing that God reveals to us at Christmas is who He is. Secondly, He reveals to us who we are. So the first thing God reveals is who He is. Many people in the world today struggle to understand who God is. Some even going so far as to question His very existence. And if God does exist, they look to what you see in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and they say, God appears to be kind of like a tyrant. He's just imposing all these rules, wanting to control our lives. They say, we don't really see much evidence that God exists. We might, in a sense, partially agree with them because we would say, that's really not the kind of God that we believe in. We don't believe in a tyrant, but rather we believe in a God who is love. And really, Christmas is about God revealing that truth to us, that He's a God of love. Not just by great signs and wonders that He did in the Old Testament, but by finally coming into our midst, by taking on our human nature so that He could draw us close into His divine nature. Last Sunday at the Epiphany, with the adoration of the Magi coming to adore the Lord, it represents God showing Himself not just to a single people, but to all of us, to the entire world. And today, as we celebrate Jesus' baptism, it reveals the wonder of the very life of God Himself. At creation, the beginning of the world, we just had hints as to who God was like. As the breath of God swept over the waters and created all things, including, as God says, "Let us make man after our image and likeness." It's kind of a strange thing to say if you think about it. Let us make man after our likeness. How can one God say that? Well, at Jesus' baptism, as Jesus comes out of the Jordan, it's revealed what us means. For the Holy Spirit descends upon Him, and the voice of the Father says, "This is my beloved Son." At the moment of the baptism of Jesus is revealed that God, the us in God, is that He's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Trinity, a relationship of love itself, that all of us are invited also to join in. So the first thing that God reveals to us at Jesus' baptism is that He is the God of love. The second thing at Jesus' baptism that God reveals is He shows us who we are. And it's so easy, again, in our world today, to get confused as to about who we are. So many people have questions about their identities. There's so many voices in our world trying to tell us this is who you actually are. And so it's important that God reveals to us the truth of our identities. He does so at Jesus' baptism. In fact, all of these events at Jesus' baptism are symbols of what happens at our baptisms. At Jesus' baptism, He descends into the waters of the Jordan. And so too at our baptism, in the baptismal font, we have the waters of baptism poured upon us. At His baptism, the Holy Spirit descends upon Him in the form of the dove. And same at our baptisms, not only the Holy Spirit, but the Father and the Son as well, come down to dwell within our souls. At Jesus' baptism, He was proclaimed to be the beloved Son of the Father. And so too at our baptisms, we become the Father's beloved children as well. At Jesus' baptism, it says the heavens were opened. And so too, with our baptism, heaven is opened to us. Finally, in the gospel today, it says that after His baptism, Jesus prays. So too, once we go through baptism, we enter into a life of relationship with God, through which we speak to him, and he speaks back to us through prayer. As Christians, we go down into the waters with Jesus so that we can rise with him to new life, reborn in water and spirit as the Father's beloved children. So when we want to know, who am I? What makes us who we are? Well, the answer is that you're a beloved son. You are a beloved daughter. Exactly what the Father says to Jesus at his baptism is the same thing he says to each of us. You are my beloved son. With you I am well pleased. Think about that. God is well pleased with you. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God is pleased with you? Sometimes it's hard to believe something like that because we think, well, there's so many ways that I screw up. I make so many mistakes. I get things wrong. And, that's true. There's moments when we're kind of helpless when it comes to certain things. And of course, God isn't pleased by sin. But even that can't stop this from being true. That you're his beloved children. Even in those times when we're not perfect, he's still pleased to have created you. Created you in all your unique ways that you are. God is pleased, of course, to then, whenever we make a mistake, to always draw us back into God's life. So as your priest, even though, I'm not Jesus, I'm kind of maybe more like John the Baptist, who says, I'm just speaking the words of the one mightier than I. But as your priest, for many of you, you've shared with me some of your struggles, the things you go through, failures even. But I also know from you your desire to follow the Lord.